I am delighted to speak and support the Local Government Auckland Law Reform Bill. This is the third after three pieces of legislation that is designed to transform Auckland and improve the lives of all Aucklanders. I'd like to start by acknowledging the huge number of Aucklanders that submitted via this process. They submitted on all of the pieces of legislation, on two of the pieces of legislation. Can I also acknowledge the Honourable Rodney Hyde and the Honourable John Carter for the huge amount of work that they have done in this area. I want to acknowledge that change can be very hard. It is probably the biggest piece of reform that we have ever had in Auckland, and I want to acknowledge the number of people that have contacted me since we have produced this revised legislation to say what a great job we have actually done. But can I remind ourselves why we are doing this? We are doing this because Auckland is a city that does not need 7 councils. Auckland is a city that needs one regional entity with one mayor and with a number of 21 local boards. And the reason we need this, and the reason the Royal Commission recognised that we needed the change in Auckland, is because we need to have a city that is efficient in terms of the way that we deliver our infrastructure, a city that caters for disadvantaged people. And I want to just address that slightly. One of the reasons why I am very supportive of having one regional entity is when you look across to South Auckland, and I've had this conversation with George Hawkins, when you look across to South Auckland, I would ask members opposite to ask this simple question: how on earth do you expect that community to be able to deliver the kind of infrastructure that it deserves with the rating base that it's got? So we are finally delivering one rating base that will enable mayors and councillors to be able to look across Auckland and deliver greater equality of opportunity. So what this bill is going to deliver, in my view, is greater social outcomes for Auckland. The other area that I want to deal with that the Select Committee spent a lot of time on is the area of CCOs. Now, members opposite, I hope that they acknowledged, as many Aucklanders have acknowledged recently with me, the changes that we have made both in terms of transparency and accountability of these entities. In fact, these CCOs will be more accountable than other CCOs in New Zealand, and we have put a number of provisions that also enable the local body politicians to be able to appoint directors from day one. But the key issue that we faced was that we had to put an interim structure in place from day one. And what we have done via the Select Committee process, and I acknowledge some of those members opposite, is we have managed to put in the nuts and bolts that enable the city to be able to function from day one, whilst also handing over power to the new local body politicians. And I think we've struck that balance really well. The other issue that I want to deal with that the Select Committee also dealt with is about greater participation for youth within Auckland. We have done something within this legislation quite special. There were many submitters that came and they said, we don't feel like we have a voice within the city, and we have put within the legislation a clause that makes the mayor have to recognise and consult and engage with people who are too young to vote. So I'm very proud. I worked on that particular piece of the legislation, and I'm very proud that one of the youngest cities in the world will now have a mechanism that will enable them to be better engaged in the process. And the member talks about the Youth Council. I just want to address that. There are two issues why we didn't put the structure formally within the legislation. The first is I would ask you to actually start to think about how, not the speaker, how I would ask members opposite to actually develop a selection clause that would have enabled youth to be selected. That was a very difficult thing that we would have had to have done. And secondly, we wanted to leave that up to the new local body politicians, because that has been part of the balance in this bill, is putting in what we need to enable the city to function while not directing local body politicians too much. The third area that I want to talk about, that I'm very excited about, is that we are going to have greater environmental responsibility in Auckland, finally, because there's going to be one regional entity responsible for things like stormwater drains, and we're also going to finally have a spatial plan. And what I would like to commend the Select Committee members for recognising is the fact that now the spatial plan has a reference to the economic, social and cultural and environmental issues in terms of Auckland. So we will finally get a planning that represents the holistic view of local government in Auckland, and I think that's very significant, and I've had great feedback about that particular part of the bill. I also want to just acknowledge the many submitters that talked about the cultural fabric of Auckland, and I think we acknowledge that, as I said, within the spatial plan, but we also acknowledge that by this government recognising that we would carry on the provisions of the Auckland Regional Amenities Act. And my predecessor, Honourable Judith Tizard, deserves the credit for that piece of legislation. And this Select Committee had many submitters that were concerned that that would not carry through, and I'm proud that we have delivered that for those submitters. The fifth and the most important, I think, as well, is about having greater accountability and transparency and efficiency of public money, and that is what we are doing by not having as much duplication across Auckland. So, Mr Speaker, what we are delivering actually is a system that has greater accountability and transparency in terms of CCOs. We are delivering a system that will enable Auckland to finally reach its potential from a cultural and a social perspective. We are delivering a system that will have greater environmental responsibility. But we are also, Mr Speaker, one of the biggest issues that the Select Committee faced was the issue around the line between what is regional and local. And I want to say this because I've thought about this quite a lot. The members opposite criticised us for not putting the functions and powers in legislation. And the difficulty that we've got, and it's been raised by another member today, is how do you possibly distinguish between what is right for Waiheke, between what is right for the heart of the CBD, between what is right for Waitakere. And what we've said is the ATA will make those initial allocations, and they will not be, and the New Auckland Council will actually be prevented from changing those allocations except to add extra functions and powers for a period of time to ensure that those local communities are protected to be able to live up to their potential in terms of diversity. So I'm very proud of that. I'm also very proud of the fact, and I say to members opposite, who have acknowledged within their Select Committee report finally that they actually support one regional entity, and now I assume that they actually support the local boards because they have not, even though their position has changed dramatically throughout this whole process, because Mr Twyford is leading the charge for them, they are finally acknowledging that they actually support the basic tenets of the system. So they have issues about the CCOs, but I think it's really important for people out there, and particularly in Auckland, to recognise that actually 80% of this Parliament support the basic structure of this legislation. So I'm very pleased, as I've said, that we are delivering a system that will have greater local democracy for Auckland. We are delivering a system that will have greater efficiency and transparency of people's rates through one regional entity. We are delivering a system that will have greater potential for the cultural fabric of Auckland. We're delivering greater environmental responsibility. But I just want to mention a couple of things that we will not take responsibility for, because I think it's really important for Aucklanders to recognise this. We can put the structure in place, right? We can put the structure in place. But what also matters, and what I haven't heard many members talk about this afternoon, is the people. And so there will be some people that will step up for Auckland. And we can put the legislation in place, and I hope many Aucklanders take that opportunity to stand for council or to stand for a local board position, and I already know of a number that are looking at putting themselves forward because they are important too. But also what came very clear throughout the Select Committee process is, regardless of what we do in terms of the legislation, there are thousands of Aucklanders that give their time in voluntary capacity to support both community groups, to support local government, to support projects within their reason, and I want to acknowledge them. So I want to acknowledge all of the people that have been involved in this process, and I want to say I think it is a really exciting time for Auckland. It is a time of opportunity. It is a new era of local government for Auckland, and I think that people have realised that we have listened, we have made significant changes to the legislation, and that finally we are going to get one regional entity delivering strong infrastructure across the city, strong, empowered local boards, and we are finally going to get an Auckland that we deserve, a greater Auckland. Thank you.